I hope you are as pumped as Pink is for this chapter, focused on managing change, sport culture, innovation, and diversity. The entrepreneur always searches for change, responds to it, and exploits it as an opportunity. Managers, similarly, need to recognize and predict when change may occur and figure out how to manage it to their best advantage and the advantage of the organization as well. The chapter identifies several forces for change. Environmental forces encompass the internal factors like structure, mission of the organization, and management, as well as external factors like competition, customers, and shareholders. Economic forces encompass things like supply and demand, whether or not you're in an economic boom or recession, and these things can have a significant impact, particularly if you look at this example here of Major League Baseball salaries since 1970. Social forces refer to things that cause cultural change or influence people, like integration in sport. Demographic forces refer to race, class, gender, disability, age, etc. And then finally, technological forces impact sport in a number of different ways in terms of how the games have changed of rules, regulations, and equipment. Resistance to change can come from three sources: whether or not people have facts about what is happening, their perception that influences whether or not they're actually going to believe those facts, and then finally our values, which are the things that we believe in and believe that are worth pursuing. I'm going to frame this discussion of resistance around racial integration in the NHL. So in 1958, Willie O'Ree, who's pictured here, became the first black player in the NHL. So in terms of ourselves, others in the work environment, the coach of the team may not have had a say in whether or not he was brought in. The general manager may have made that decision. So the coach may be thinking about what's in it for me. How am I going to get him to work with these other players who may not have played with a black player before? Players on his team may have been thinking about what's this mean for my job now that there's an increase. Now that we're adding black players to the league, that means there's an increased player pool, which makes it more competitive. And then finally, in terms of the work environment, the narrative at the time in the 50s was that integrating society in the workplace specifically would lead to more racial tension, racial strife, less productivity, and was considered to be, by a lot of people, generally a bad thing. Fortunately for the Bruins and for the NHL, as well as for Major League Baseball and Jackie Robinson, and then Chuck Cooper, who played for the Celtics as the first black player, that integrating these leagues didn't lead to a huge disaster. It was overwhelmingly positive in the long run. Okay, here's your answer to why Pink was on the first slide. In 2014, 24 Hour Fitness acquired 30 or so Bally Fitness clubs that Pink repped in the Northeast, Denver, and San Francisco. So in terms of the stages in the change process, here's how it may have worked at those particular organizations. The first step is denial. So people may have thought that, or managers in Bally and 24 Hour Fitness may have thought it wasn't really going to happen. That's assuming that they knew about the deal. And then after the deal was executed, these managers may have provided some resistance to the acquisitions. Then the third step, exploration, occurs as the change begins, when the managers are starting to be educated about what's actually going to happen. And then the final step is commitment. So these managers can either commit to the change and follow through with it, or they could not commit and end up either losing their jobs or choosing to go elsewhere. So as the change process plays out, an employee level of commitment may also change. One way to overcome resistance is to follow a series of steps. Establishing good relationships with employees is the key to creating trust, and also key to getting them on board with the change. If they trust you, they're more likely to get on board with it. Second, develop a plan that helps overcome their resistance to change. Third, state why the change is needed. So you're going to need to clearly explain to employees why the change is happening, why it's needed. Next, try to facilitate win-win situations. So attempt to meet employee needs by the next step, involving them in the process, and then finally provide them support. So you want to make sure there are some training sessions that educate them on the importance of change and what's actually happening. Give them accurate information and access to individuals that can tell them about this information and explain it in order to help facilitate the change and overcome this resistance. In addition to overcoming resistance to change, organizations need to identify the 4 variables of change and how they may impact them. Organizations may want to adjust their strategy to meet environmental demands, though a change in strategy may in fact change the structure of that particular organization. Changing technology may increase productivity, and certainly technology in cycling has improved since the 1952 Tour de France. I mean, if you look at that support vehicle that's back there as well as their gear, a little bit different than these days. And then the final variable, people, is important because people develop and implement changes in strategy, and the commitment of people will influence whether or not the change actually works. For a long time, Vans were the premier skate shoe company, but as the skate industry dipped in the late 1990s, Vans appeared to regroup and then began to branch out into snowboarding, lifestyle areas, women's clothing and shoes, and also sponsored female athletes, which was a huge change from their past as they were pretty strictly focused on male skateboarders. Lewin's model offers a framework that Vans could use to help deal with resistance to change. Unfreezing focuses on reducing the strength of forces maintaining the status quo by using data to inform them about the issues that are causing this change and ideally get them on board. Moving emphasizes people learning the new desired behavior, embracing those values that go along with that particular behavior. And the final step, refreezing, involves when the desired change becomes the new status quo and you continually reinforce those new behaviors and values. Organizational culture is the set of values, beliefs, and standards for acceptable behavior that its members share. Understanding an organization's culture helps you understand how it functions and how employees should do things to fit in. It appears as though Jennifer Aniston is in the process of getting lectured about her lack of flair. There are 3 levels of culture. The first, the behavior of culture, refers to observable actions, that is, what we do and say. Written and spoken language, dress, and material objects are also part of our behavior. The second level, values and beliefs, refer to the way we think we ought to behave and identify what we think it takes to be successful. These are principles that guide behavior and decision-making in the organization. Level 3 are assumptions, which are deeply ingrained values and beliefs whose truths we never question because we think about it in terms of this is the way things have always been done. In terms of defining diversity, as illustrated here on the slide, there are a number of different ways to define diversity. We often think about diversity in terms of race or gender, but other demographic factors like age, sexual orientation, disability, social class, problem-solving ability also contribute to diverse work environments. There are a number of factors that are leading to an increased concern with diversity in the workplace. First, the changing nature of work refers to the idea that there are a number of organizations that structure work much differently, where it used to be you worked by yourself and you got things done. Now there's an increase in people working in teams and collaborating and working more closely with each other. Changing demographics refers to an increase in median age, proportion of racial minorities, LGBTQ individuals, and women in the workforce. This slide reflects the growing minority populations in the United States between 2010 and 2050. This slide illustrates the growth of the senior population in the United States over 100 years or so. So as indicated by both slides, particularly around racial and age demographics, those are changing quite drastically and will have a significant impact on the workforce. Here are 2 additional factors that have led to an increased concern with diversity in the workplace. Federal and state laws like the Civil Rights Act, the Rehabilitation Act, the American with Disabilities Act, those latter 2 have focused on providing access to education and access and to prevent discrimination in the workforce. And then Title IX that mandates equal access to opportunities in education for girls and women. And the idea that organizations have a moral and ethical obligation to have a diverse workplace that reflects the environment and community in which they live, and ultimately leading to corporate social responsibility. So Doug Blevins, who is pictured here, was born with cerebral palsy, and he presently is an assistant coach at a Division III institution, but was nominated for the NFL Hall of Fame in 2013 because of his work with the Dolphins for 6 years as their kicking coach. So legislation like the Rehabilitation Act and the ADA helped provide access to opportunities for Blevin in football. Garden, Schwartz, and Rowe identified 3 factors not discussed in the chapter that organizations should focus on in order to implement change related to diversity. The first factor they need to focus on is individual attitudes and behaviors. So people's responses to cultural diversity in the workplace, things like foreign language, race, and generational gaps. And trying to manage those. The second part, managerial skills and practices. So needing to tailor management styles to fit employees. So should you give public feedback? Should you give private feedback? How do you approach people in the workplace? And then finally, organizations' values and policies. So hiring practices, promotion practices, to reflect the best candidate pool, and fighting against homologous reproduction, which refers to promoting people that look like you. The Rooney Rule in the NFL is a prime example of policies designed to promote diversity in hiring head coaches. Art Rooney, pictured here, sponsored the policy that mandates teams to interview a minority candidate for a job. There may be some negative aspects associated with creating a diverse sport organization. Number 1, there may be some costs associated with accommodating diverse workers, particularly if you have to adjust your physical environment. Second, reduced efficiency of communication. Perhaps there's an increased time spent understanding each other's perspectives and arriving at a group solution. There could be some employee absenteeism and turnover, as well as general discomfort, resistance, and conflicts, because people aren't used to working with certain populations. However, as managers recognize the differences as well as similarities among people and realize that each person has unique qualities that contribute to the total effort, they may be able to capitalize on these diverse features and coordinate them for productivity and effectiveness in the following ways. 1, and it could help create enhanced revenue, more effective marketing strategies, as well as improved problem-solving, decision-making, creativity, and innovation. A number of different factors contribute to change in organizations. Being able to adapt and manage change are key components to organizational success.